Welcome back. Good morning from most of us. Maybe good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are, however you are. Welcome back to another week of daily meditations. Uh, yeah, oh, good. Thanks. Good. So, without further delay, we have Miles Kessler back with us this week. Miles is a lineage holder in the Mahasi tradition of meditation. For over 25 years, he has been teaching meditation and the embodiment spiritual awakening to thousands of people around the world. His work focuses on establishing the practice of mindfulness, progressing through the development of meditative insight, and the evolving expression of the Dharma in the world. He lives in Tel Aviv, Israel. So this is even a more special week because Miles is able to be back with us. We all know how the circumstances are. So welcome back, Miles. And thanks for being here. Okay, so quick note, you all know how this works. If you're here for the first time, well, first, very warm welcome to you, and I hope that you will stay with us. If not, well, this is an hour-long session. Miles will have a talk and then lead us through a practice, and then by the time we'll have some time for the Q&A. And this month's theme was about fear to fearlessness, and Miles will take fear, courage, and surrender on the path of the spiritual warrior, which is quite adequate, I think, for these times. Okay, so last thing is Dana, of course, the little speech of Dana. We all do our best to be here every day, every week, every Sunday, every Saturday, every time, basically, just, nourishing this Sangha. And we do this heartily and freely offered, but not free of cost, as Martin would say. So we depend on your generosity. And I'm pretty aware at this point that generosity is a very large spectrum word. So the fact that you're all here and that you are keeping on this practice and showing up in whatever conditions you do, the fact that we have the teachers teaching here, whatever the conditions they're in, this is a big practice of generosity. But besides that, we also need a more tangible kind of generosity which goes through donations to keep this platform running and to keep this Sangha thriving. So whatever you can give is very welcome. It is also shared with the teachers, and I'll let you have the link for donations in the chat in a minute. But for now, this is all from me. I'm going to take myself off and leave the stage to Miles. Wishing you all a very good week and very good sessions. Thank you. Ugh.
Thank you, Jorge. There we go. Hello, everybody. Yeah, thank you very much, Jorge, and thanks to Sangha Live once again for the invitation to offer a week of daily meditations and welcome everybody. I guess for the majority of the people, this is more your home than mine. I'm just a guest, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all once again. I'm a little under the weather. My youngest has been sick for the past, week or so. And so now that whatever she had is kind of passed on. It's not terribly overwhelming, but I might need a little bit of, just your patience if I'm sniffing or whatever. So, so as Jorge mentioned, the theme for this month's daily meditations with Sangha Live is fear and fearlessness. So, I was thinking about this theme quite a bit because not only am I a meditation teacher, but I'm also an Aikido teacher. I hold lineage in two traditions, and fear and fearlessness is obviously a big theme in meditation, but it's also a big theme in the martial arts and Aikido, especially one of many beautiful martial arts. But what's unique about Aikido is it's a positive sum martial art. In other words, it's a martial art for conflict resolution, for the resolution of conflict. It's not a zero sum martial art, but rather a positive sum martial art, and that kind of brings another dimension of dealing with fear. And this week we're going to be looking at fear. We're going to be looking at courage in the relationship to fear. We're going to be looking at surrender in relationship to fear, and basically we're going to be looking at practicing with some of the qualities on the path of a spiritual warrior. And I'm going to be introducing a few. Well, I say introducing. For some of you, you may know these terms, but I'll be introducing a few terms that come directly out of the Aikido tradition, which are kind of Zen-based terms. Today, we're going to be looking at Shoshin, which is beginner's mind. Tomorrow, we'll be looking at Zanshin, which is a sustained mindfulness. On Wednesday, we'll be looking at Mushin, which is no mind. And on Thursday, we'll be looking at Fudoshin, which is the unshakable mind, and how all these relate to fear and fearlessness. Thursday, we'll kind of wrap it up with something. I'm not quite sure yet. But before we begin today, I have a question for you. And this is time for reflection. And you can write your answers in the chat if I can read them. They're very small. I shouldn't say they're very small. They're normal size. My eyes are not like what they used to be. So here's the question. Since this theme is around fear and fearlessness, to better know ourselves, how many times did you experience fear in the past 24 hours? Please write in the chat. Once, twice, 100 times. I mean, it's got to be somewhere in there. Just reflect for a moment. How many times have you experienced fear in the past 24 hours? Oh, here we go. A few times. Never, Julita. God bless you. That's great. At least once. Okay. At least one, two, several times, 5 times, a few, 3, many times, 3 times, once, maybe 8. Good morning from North London. Good morning, Catherine. 2, 3 times, no times, 3 mild times, many, 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 several times, quite a few at once. Yeah. So if we reflect a little bit, just, let them keep coming. There's a lot of people in this call. So several times. I remember the first time I received this, I got this question. I was in a martial arts workshop. I was probably in my 30s, early 30s. And let's say on the more kind of identified with my macho side of my personal journey, let's say more or less. And the teacher asked this question. I was like right away, oh, no times, no times. And then and the homework they gave us to go home, just check it out. See how many times fear comes up. And then when you come back tomorrow, we're going to talk about it. So I went home thinking, whatever. And oh my God, it was there almost all the time. Like even this morning, I was afraid as the tech, Jorge asked me to pay attention to certain tech things. I'm like, oh my God, can I do that? That's fear came up. I'm a little under the weather. How am I going to perform in this teaching today? Fear came up. Going out for a morning walk. There's fear here. There's fear there. Do I need an umbrella? Is it going to rain? Oh, my hair. Oh my God. There's so many types of fear that come up. And, They come up for one simple reason. We could say two simple reasons. But the sense of self has fear. You know the old saying, no self, no problem, no other, no fear. Because we have a sense of self, we have a boundary. Inside the boundary is me, outside the boundary is other, good, bad, and whatever, all that stuff. And because of that boundary, we have a sense of security and a sense of insecurity. And it's really kind of gets down to the whole kind of Buddhist project in a way. You know, when we are looking at spiritual liberation through our practice of meditation and other practices, but primarily through our practice of meditation, primarily more specifically through the practice of mindfulness meditation, what happens is that we systematically, actually, we don't do it, systematically, the process takes us through incrementally. Thank God it's incrementally. Sometimes it's a lot. Usually it's incremental. An incremental dissolution of the self, an incremental dissolution of the false sense of self. And that false sense of self, God bless us all, goes kicking and screaming and scratching and fighting the whole way to Nibbana. The Buddha said, ultimately speaking, there is no security. Uh-oh. Ultimately speaking, there is no security. Now, for the sense of self, that's kind of hard to hear. Relatively speaking, it's very good to have security. You know, certainly, I hope we have insurance if we're sick, health insurance if we're sick. I hope we have a nice kind of shelter. I hope we live in a bit ironic for me to say this right now, but that we live in a rather secure place and not at war, which we are. But right now, these days here in Tel Aviv, it's doesn't feel like we're at war unless you allow yourself to feel what's happening in Gaza, which just, it just break you down. Sorry, I'm getting lost. Last time I was here, it was right after this really horrible war started, and as I was saying back then, I'm an open wound. I still am. Not completely healed, and these things take time. But in this context, whether you're in a place that's actually, it would be completely legitimate to have fear, or if you're in a place that's completely secure, it doesn't matter. Fear is a constant companion. And if it's not here in this moment, it's just around the next corner, really. And in fact, if you think about the next corner, there's going to be fear about that. It is a constant companion. And we have these three basic shouldn't say responses. We have these three basic egoic reactions, not responses. Response would be conscious, reaction would be reflexive. We have these three basic responses to fear, and we all, what do you say? They all manifest in us from time to time in different ways. But you might even have a particular go-to, or you might be habituated in one direction or another. The three basic responses to something that is perceived as fearful, whether it's actually fearful or just in our head, which sometimes it is. I'm afraid a meteor is going to hit the earth. But there's no meteor. There might be. Look up. There might be, but it could actually be something worthy of fear. It could be something that's just being projected. It does not matter. Our three egoic responses are really based on this kind of our survival mechanisms of fight, flight, and freeze that reflexively, unconsciously, reactively, when we're faced with fear, we will either resist it, which is the flight, or we will collapse into it or collapse away from it. But it's like we're not going, it's like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. Collapse, which would be the flight. And when I say collapse, the fear is very clear and present always with us. And the third, fight, flight, freeze, resist, collapse, deny. We deny the fear. It's like when I asked that question, or when I was asked that question, how many times did you fear in the last 24 hours? What? Me? Fear in the last 24 hours? No, no fear. But then when I really, because I trusted this teacher, I trusted him. He was he wasn't just teaching how to fight. He was teaching how to grow as a human being. Because I trusted him, I went back and I kept my mind open as he suggested. And I went, and oh my God, I discovered it was there all the time. Afraid of that woman over there. I'm afraid of that man over there. Afraid of those people over there. Afraid of this situation. Afraid that somebody's going to cut in line in front of me at the market. Oh my God. Whatever. Afraid somebody's going to see me. Afraid somebody's not going to see me. Even worse. So I started to become aware that all these fears are there's a multitude of types of fear, but the fear is the same. And the responses are very simple. Fight it or resist, collapse into it or flee in a way, and or deny it by kind of numbing ourselves out, pretending it's not there, partaking of whatever you partake of so as not to deal with it. No judgment at all. But just we know that these are not mindful responses to fear, and therefore will never lead to any type of spiritual fearlessness, a core quality of the spiritual warrior. In Buddhism, they basically talk about two different types of fear. It comes in two different ways. There's many types of fear, but it's basically two. There's the unwholesome fear, which is kind of what I'm talking about now, based on a misunderstanding of reality. In other words, ignorance. Buddhist term is ignorance. There's the unwholesome type of fear, but then there's the wholesome type of fear. The unwholesome type of fear is about everything on the outside of our boundaries, everything that could happen. Fear is always in the future. Fear is never in the present moment. I'm afraid in the present moment, but I'm afraid that something's going to happen in the future. It's always a projection into the future. And it's always on the outside of my boundaries. It's coming this way. Even if a tiger's going to eat me, it's like, it's going to happen. It's even going to happen in the next second. Oh my God. It's coming this way, and it's something that's fearful. And that's all considered unwholesome fear. Just the basic stuff that we all have, quote unquote, ignorance. The other type of fear is a wholesome fear. Wholesome fear. And wholesome fear is when we actually start to see the greater truth of reality. For example, that ultimately speaking, there is no security. We were born in this human body, in this human experience, and we are on a non-stop trajectory towards old age, sickness, decay, and death. That's the fact. We can extend it, we can prolong it, we can sometimes, like a cat with 9 lives, we can escape it, but we're always heading towards it. Oh my God. Seeing that truth. And the fear that arises from that truth is a wholesome fear, because you're seeing the true nature of reality. Starting to see that underneath all of this sense of miles, underneath all of the sense of self, that there ultimately is no self, which happens to be the most liberating experience one can have. Liberating in the sense that fear does not exist. No self, no problem. Oh my God, no self, no other, no fear. That experience is incredibly liberating, On the other side of that, on the other side of the understanding of that, on this side, which is, it happens incrementally, it happens several times a day. Sometimes we get released, sometimes we're back in, we contract down, we have a situation in life that contracts us, and we're back into that solid sense of self. On this side of moving towards that non-self boundary, there's all kinds of fear, and moving closer and closer to that boundary in one way or another dials up the fear. Now, here's the beautiful thing about our fear, our practice, I should say, that together with, as we move closer and closer to this non-self boundary, through the practice of mindfulness meditation, it happens automatically. As the sense of self starts to go through first deconstruction, but ultimately dissolution, we get closer and closer to that non-self boundary, the fear will arise, and it actually peaks in the practice. I'll talk about that later in the week. Bayanyana is the insight knowledge of the fearfulness of non-self on this side of the non-self experience. So it's just like if a tiger was going to eat me, oh my God, that would be intensely fearful, perhaps, probably. But same thing with starting to see the non-self nature of reality, that I ultimately am not what I thought. It's as equally as fearful. But when we're approaching that wholesome fear, that wisdom type of fear, through the practice, we are supported by a tremendous amount of internal spiritual strength. Our faith. Oh, sorry about that. It always happens. Our faith gets strengthened. Our energetic effort is ready to meet the challenge. Our mindfulness is open, vast, and contains everything in that moment. Our concentration keeps us one pointed and unshakable. And the wisdom, the incremental bits of wisdom that we're gaining through the practice help us to understand that this is part and parcel of the path. And the only way out of this, is through it. Okay, we got to sit now. So mindfulness is the key. Mindfulness is the key. Remember, the fundamental quality of mindfulness is that it sinks. Yeah. So as we're meditating, if you feel yourself starting to get busy and a little bit kind of, you'll notice a difference a bit on the surface, then just be, somehow, not somehow, but try to, know it. And in that knowing, recognize that there's a differentiating of an awareness, that your mind, the mind that is mindful, the part of the mind that is mindful can observe that experience. That's what mindfulness is. It's a part of your mind that can observe an experience and cultivate that space as much as possible. And what will happen is that feeling will sink. Every time you're able to differentiate your awareness and observe what's arising in your experience, there'll be a sense of sinking, a sense that things are getting deeper, things are getting more expansive, that your container of awareness is holding more. Maybe holding is the wrong word, but can contain more. That simple quality of mindfulness is that mindfulness sinks, and approach every moment with beginner's mind. Shoshin, as if you're seeing it for the first time. Shoshin, in a way, is an antidote to fear, because fear is always kind of coming back again. And it might be a new fear, but there's a lot of fears that just keep repeating. And it's always about the future. It's always about what's going to happen in a moment or in a year or in a day. See that new as if it's for the first time. And when you can do that, when you can bring a beginner's mind attitude to any fear that might be arising in the practice, a beginner's mind attitude to any desires, any aversions, any sleepiness, any restlessness, any doubts that might be arising in the practice or in your daily life, suddenly there's a differentiation from that and knowing it, even if you've seen it 1,000 times, knowing it as if for the first time. Why? Because that sets up the conditions for things to sink. And as your mindfulness deepens, what you discover at a deeper level will literally be a discovering it for the first time. No matter how many times you sit down to meditate, if you bring the quality of Shoshin, the quality of of beginner's mind, return to beginner's mind, as the Japanese say, you will start to cultivate the experience of cultivate the quality of knowing an experience for the first time. So why don't we sit and practice together? So let's go ahead and close our eyes. First, just do a general check-in. What has this talk activated, stimulated, triggered in your system? And give that all the space it needs, total acceptance, total recognition, the good, the bad, the ugly. Just be present. Notice any mental activity that's going on around the talk. And know that there's a certain momentum to the thoughts of the mind. Again, differentiating your awareness, accepting that it's there, allowing it, but just observing it. Neither feeding the thoughts, trying to stamp them out. Just be and be with what's arising. And notice that as you're mindful, or as you're mindfully observing what's arising, there's a quality of sinking, a quality of sinking. And bring your attention to the body, and be mindful of any sensations or qualities or characteristics that are kind of dominant in your experience. The mind will go right to them. It doesn't take much of a search. And just check in with yourself. Are you open to these experiences? Are you allowing these experiences? Or are you resisting these experiences? Or are you denying, choosing, consciously or unconsciously, choosing not to feel them? All good, all things to be mindful of. Open and allow. And bring your mindfulness to the breath. And even though we've observed the breath hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of times, Shoshin ni modoru, as the Japanese say, return to the beginner's mind and know your breath as if for the first time, mindfully observing the sensations, the qualities, and characteristics on the in breath, mindfully observing and knowing deeper the qualities and characteristics on the out breath. Letting the breath be your anchor, your home base, that you establish your mindfulness in. And should the mind wander away, that you bring it back to anchor it. And also allow your mindfulness to go to wherever is calling. If there's mental activities, allow yourself to be mindful of that. If there's feelings coming up, allow yourself to be mindful of those. If there's other sensations in the body, allow your mindfulness to also know those experiences, know the qualities and characteristics, and as you continue to observe, know what happens to those experiences. And at some point, sooner or later, returning to the breath, returning home, and being mindful of each breath and each moment by moment, breath by breath. Bringing your mindfulness back to the body. Feel the body. Bringing your mindfulness back to the breath. Feel the breath. Bring your mindfulness to your mental state and know the nature of the mind. Feel the space on the inside. And as you slowly open your eyes, feel the space on the outside. And give yourself a few moments to come out of the meditation. So we have about 10 more minutes for any questions that may may have come up. And I would say just if you think of like a priority of questions, if you have something related to the theme of this week, fear, the talk that I gave before, if you have a practice related question, that's of course maybe the most relatable for everybody. And then any general Dharma questions that you have can be fine. But if you do, just drop them in the chat. Yeah, you're welcome, man. Beginner's mind is it's a beautiful topic, and it's a wonderful little practice to always, bring to every moment. In Japanese, they say Shoshin ni Madoru. That means, and it's kind of a social saying, and it's just a reminder always to kind of come back to the beginner's mind. It means return to the beginner's mind. While we're waiting for questions, and please do write your questions if you have. While we're waiting for questions, I do want to tell everybody to, I think I failed to mention this before, but like in the past times I gathered, if something comes up during my talks or this week, then feel very free to go over to Sangha Live's forum and write something in the forum. And time is a real thing. I'm quite a busy with businesses and with my kids, but if I have time, I'll definitely answer any questions that are written over in the forum. So let's see. Jane says, in the moment of freezing in fear, could you relate the steps to come out of it again, please? Well, the steps. I would say maybe attitudes, or maybe a better way to say it is just how it would relate to when we're freezing. First and foremost is to accept it. Accept that that's happening. In other words, it's a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's an okay thing. And it could even be good thing. If survival requires us to freeze, then freezing is actually a good thing in a moment of survival. But when we freeze, just kind of in the face of some perceived fear, first and foremost, we just need to accept that this is what's going on, and notice the space that brings around it. The freezing comes up. It's almost like we have a little bit of a kind of a relationship to it that kind of makes it worse. But if we can just open up with a little bit of space, and that comes from acceptance, acceptance that will somehow relax the space around the freezing, and give that freezing quality, that freezing fixation, a little bit of space for its qualities to start to melt and change. So like everything else, mindfulness is the key, and with acceptance of freezing, that means that we respect that it's coming up, whether it's legitimate or just kind of out of a projection. I hope that's helpful. Natalie, dear Miles, when you asked the question about fear in the last 24 hours, yes, I did not think there had been much, but on reflection, I realized that recently there has been fear around. Oops, sorry, here comes more questions. There has been, I realized there has been fear around old age. I will be 58 in July, and it seems a big deal. Could you speak to this fear, please? Yeah. Well, I'm 60, so I can kind of relate. We're right around the same age, and part of the fear around old age is that our bodies aren't like they used to be. Can't do everything I used to do, and sometimes the mind even needs a little bit of a break. Um, hmm. I'm just trying to think the best way to address this. Um, well, I mean, let's just look at it from a Dharma point of view. That we have to realize that that is our fate. Yeah, we are all moving towards decay, old age, sickness, and death. And this one is about the old age. So yeah, we are getting older, and that can bring up some fear because of the basic insecurity that comes with that. But see, in a way, our meditation practice, I was talking before about how the meditation systematically starts to deconstruct the self, then really systematically starts to dissolve the self. That process, that incremental process, is in one way, one very real way, is a series of deaths. Ego deaths. That every time we dissolve another layer of the onion, or every time we contract around something and manage to, through the grace of God, manage to be mindful of it and be with it, and it relaxes and fades and goes on. That is like an ego death. And Winston Churchill said that the only way out of it is through it. Or I don't know if he said that. I know he said if you're going through hell, keep going. But the only way out of this is through it. So that basically means, that's why I entitled this week, "The Way of the Spiritual Warrior." When fear arises, we turn towards it, not as a way to resist or fight it, but as a way to courageously observe it, be with it, and then surrender to it. So I'm going to speak more about courage and surrender in the coming days. But I would just say, for a very simple practice for you, is when you notice this fear coming up, open and allow it. And then you might begin to see what are the causal conditions that are arising. So yeah, okay, I'm at a certain age and there's fear of like getting older. losing whatever I had. That's normal. But as we start to observe that, you'll see, okay, the fear came up. It came up because of this. This came up because of this. This came up because of this. Your mindfulness will start to go back more and more to the cause and effect source of that fear. We usually see fear kind of on the surface, but there's a lot of causes and conditions that create that fear. Mindfulness takes us back to that source. And it's almost like there's a forest fire on the surface, but it all started with a spark. When we can be mindful to the extent that we see things at a spark, they arise, they go through these three universal characteristics that they're impermanent. They come and they go. They come, they stay for a while, and they go. They're unsatisfactory, which is very much, that's the dukkha. That's what you're talking about here. Ultimately speaking, they're non-self. When the non-self arises, not only is being 58 or 60 not a problem, but there's no sense of being 58 or 60. Relatively, yeah, sure. I can look on my passport and see my birth date. I know how old I am. I look back, have some good memories, have some bad memories, have lots of memories. But in the moment of presence, of pure mindfulness, it does not exist. No self, no problem. Okay, wow, a lot of questions came up here. Thanks, Catherine. I'll do this quickly. It seems that a thought outside of intrinsic senses could be a kind of fear. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. David, sorry about that. I just don't understand what you mean, and we just don't have time for me to ask. Could you distinguish between fears and worries? Fears are more fundamental. Worries are downstream. So if we want to know what is the cause of the worry, we stop, differentiate our awareness, become mindful of the worry, and that actually might show, oh, I'm worrying because my kids are somewhere in school over there, and so I'm worried about what's happening. And then if I can just be with that, I'm worried what's happening is that they're not with me, and I don't have control. And this is just kind of I'm making this up as an example, and I don't have control. And if I keep staying with that, oh, control is an issue for me. If I stay with that mindfulness, I might discover it's like, yeah, well, life is out of control. If I stay with that, oh my God, there's no security. Oh my God, that's liberating. So when I say linking back, mindfulness actually takes us back upstream to the source of everything. And the source of everything is liberation. It's completely free. Downstream of that, as the ego starts to solidify sense of self, it knows that there's no sense of self. Kind of at the bottom, we all know it. We're not conscious of it, but we know it. That's the source of all fears. And then everything else downstream of that is related to that. If your meditation, if and when your meditation practice takes you back to the source, it all disappears. And there is no fear. Okay, we're going to finish with that today. Lots of great questions. I can save some of these for tomorrow. If you want to put something in the forum, I won't spend a lot of time over there, but I'll do my best to try to keep an eye on it and answer if I can. Thank you all. Once again, remember that the Sangha Live is based on donations, so help out with that if you can. And we will see you tomorrow when we will be looking at, one more moment, we will be looking at Zanshin, a sustained mindfulness, sustained presence. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.